Good morning, Connecting Point family. It is Friday, which means I once again have the awesome opportunity to share in some devotional thoughts based on our devotional readings out of the Following Jesus Bible Reading Plan from our YouVersion Bible app. Though the thoughts that I really have come out of our readings from Acts, both today and really for the last couple of days, I do kind of want to draw quick attention to what we read in Second Kings today, and really just how in our story that we read today, we read the fulfillment of essentially like prophecies, that the fulfillment of what God had said is going to happen as a direct result of the disobedience in the house of Ahab. And so you have this new outsider that is being that is being anointed as the new king of Israel, Jehu, and he is told to go face Ahab's son, Joram, and then he went on to go meet up with Jezebel. And if you think earlier on at the end, well, I guess not at the end. At the end of First Kings, there is this proclamation that is made by Elijah that essentially Ahab was going to die. The house of Ahab was going to die. And because remember, this proclamation was made that Ahab was going to die and everything was going to come to an end. And then Ahab turned and repented. And so because of his humility, God said, okay, this is going to now fall on your descendants. And so it is like a coming true of that proclamation. And in our story today, we read that in fact Joram was killed by Jehu, and then like the kind of nasty details of the death of Jezebel that were prophesied in at the end of First Kings actually come true today in Second Kings. And it's not for lack of Jehu trying to go and bury Jezebel. The prophecy was that there was going to be nothing left of her body to bury after she died, and she was thrown from her window, and that killed her. And Jehu went inside to eat, and then came back out sent people back out to bury her, recognizing that she was the daughter of a king, and so she's royalty. So there's certain respects that needed to be paid her, and yet by the time they got to her, it was already too late. She had already been consumed by wild dogs, and there's nothing left of her other than her skull. And so I guess just this quick conclusion of God's word never returns void, and that is something that can be encouraging. I guess if you were on the side of Ahab's family or related to Jezebel, that could be something that is terrifying. But it's something that we can find assuring here as we live in a time where people's words change quicker than the weather in Indiana. And many of you may not even get that, but something that's said in the Midwest when we were living in Indiana about the weather was, if you don't like the weather right now, just wait 5 minutes and it'll be different. So people's word these days just change so quickly, and it's hard to be able to trust in anything. And yet the quick lesson that we can pull from 2 Kings today is that God's word is a word that we can trust in, for good or bad. It's a word that we can count on. But then the other piece that I really kind of has been resonating with me over these last couple of days, and just continued to develop today as we read about Paul and his journey now in captivity, is Paul's resolute pursuit of what God had called him to. So a few days back, you have Paul journeying to Jerusalem, and there was a number of people who said, Paul, you should not be going. Do not go. We beg you not to go, because this is going to be what happens. You're going to get arrested. They're hunting for you. They're gunning for you, and it's going to lead to your death, and this is bad, and we don't want you to go through that. And Paul doesn't respond with, that's not going to happen to me. Paul simply says, I must go. This is what God has for me. I must go to Jerusalem. This is where God is taking me right now. And so not only do we get this understanding from outsiders making this proclamation about Paul and how he's going to his demise, but you get this sense that has been building for a few days now that Paul knew that he was heading into trouble. And yet he embraced that, recognizing it as a part of God's plan for his life. And so he was determined to step in line with what God had for him. And so it didn't matter if it was the threat of arrest or the threat of assassination, which occurred today as we read. Paul continued and he went to Jerusalem. He proclaimed the good news of the gospel, which is why they were gunning for him. He proclaimed the good news of the gospel, ultimately led to his arrest. And even in his arrest, even in this place where he found himself, where he was like in captivity for the very thing that he had been doing, he continued to do that very thing. Like even in his captivity, he embraced the opportunity to tell other people about the good news of the gospel. And so I kind of, as I read this, got like these shades of Joseph. Sorry, I was blanking on the name there. These shades of Joseph, where Joseph's brothers had intended something for evil and they sell him into slavery to try to profit from him. And then in the long run, it ultimately results in the salvation of not just the people of Israel, but also the salvation of Egypt and those around them, because they were saved from this famine that occurred as a result of Joseph's understanding of dreams and that were given to him by God. And so you come into today's story and you see this thing of Paul that these people had intended ill, right? They a few days back we read this statement, where did it go? Where as he was being arrested, he was taken into the barracks, and the crowd that followed kept shouting, "Get rid of him!" Like their intent was to end his life. Their intent was to end his ability to continue to profess this good news of this gospel. And yet he refused to let the fear of what they were promising to keep him from sharing what he knew he had to share. Like I said, not only was he resolute as he journeyed towards Jerusalem, but he seems to continue to be resolute as he even is existing in captivity and heading further and further towards his execution. We know that this journey that he is on is eventually going to lead to his demise. And like I said, we already got the sense that he knew this too, and yet he continues to put one foot in front of the other, walking towards this because he knows that it is God's plan for his life. And so just as with Joseph's story, what his brothers intended for evil, God used for good. I kind of get this feeling that what the people intended for evil with respect to Paul, God used for good in the midst of Paul's obedience. I have no way to substantiate this claim, but as I was reading this, I couldn't help but think, because Paul is gaining an audience now, not just with like common Gentiles, but he is gaining an audience now with soldiers and with generals, and then ultimately with government officials for the Roman Empire. And I had this thought that crossed my mind. I know it happened a couple of centuries later, but a couple, 2-3 centuries later, but I couldn't help but think that what Paul was doing right now was planting the seed for what would eventually happen when the Roman Empire became a Christian empire. Again, I have no way to substantiate that, but I just can't help but see Paul's faithfulness resulting in a harvest that was greater than anybody could have ever imagined. And even if that didn't happen, Paul was still faithful, and that's kind of what I wanted to focus in on today. And so as I thought about this application to my own life, as I thought about and journaled about, like, God, what are you trying to show me? What are you trying to tell me? And I just got this like overwhelming sense of this desire to have the same determination, to be as resolute as Paul was in pursuing the task that God has for me. Like, even if it's going to lead to suffering, even if it's going to lead to my death, even if it's going to lead to really uncomfortable situations, Lord, I want to pursue your desire for my life with everything that I am. And so I hope that, and I pray that each of us today, as we read that, as we kind of marinate on that thinking, as we think about that, that we would find ourselves in a place where we say, regardless of the consequences to come, I, from this day forward, am going to be devoted to, I am going to resolutely walk in the plan that God has for me. Because ultimately my life is nothing if not a life that is devoted to God. And so whatever that might mean for me, I'm going to walk in this direction. And so as we walk into this weekend, as we continue to walk into the new developments of life on a daily basis, would each of us kind of find, I guess, the certainty of God's word that we discussed in 2 Kings? Would each of us find the truth of that, the truth of God's word, the truth of who God is, the truth of who God has called us to be, and in the midst of a time where things are constantly changing and we really don't know what the future holds, would we be a people that know who holds the future, that walk in line with and live out a life that recognizes that I know who is in control, even though the world is out of control, even though even my own life is kind of out of my own control. What I can control is my pursuit of God's direction for my life, and so that's what I'm going to do. So I hope in the days to come you would find yourself making that claim, that you would find yourself daily waking up, dedicating yourself to the pursuit of God's plan for your life, and resolutely walking in that on a day-by-day basis. Well, I hope you guys have a awesome rest of your Friday and an amazing 4th of July tomorrow. And I look forward to seeing you guys on Sunday morning as we gather together to worship the God of all creation. Love you guys, and we'll talk to you later. Peace out.